Hi everybody, Peter here, Thailand bound. I thought I'd share a story with you today. As you know, I lived in Thailand for a number of years, and it's a story about a man and a woman, an American expatriate, somebody who was living in Thailand, working in Thailand, and his girlfriend. There's a lot of stories on the internet about foreign men who fall for Thai girls, especially bar girls, and it always ends the same way. This story is a little bit different. In the stories that you normally come across, what will happen is the foreign guy will meet the girl, he'll fall in love with her, and she'll end up extracting most of his cash or playing him for a fool, and he'll come off the worst. It's always the same, and these stories that you come across on YouTube, they always end like that. The guy can't find the girl, she's got a Thai husband or a Thai boyfriend, and he's basically lost a lot of money. As I say, this video is a little bit different to that. There's some highs, there's some lows, and it's quite a good story. It's a true story that I haven't experienced when I lived there. I think this is about 10 years ago, 15 years ago this happened, but just finished my coffee. So, for the sake of the video, we won't be using any real names. We'll call the guy Mark, and we'll call the girl Apple. Now, Mark was in a company that would move him around Asia, particularly places like Cambodia and the Philippines, Myanmar. It was computers, IT, that sort of thing. He'd never been to Thailand before. I don't know why. You'd have thought Thailand would have been quite high up on the list of destinations for that kind of company. But anyway, he'd never been to Thailand before, and his company sent him to Bangkok. He wasn't in the country more than a few weeks, and he basically fell in love with Bangkok. He fell in love with the Thai people. He enjoyed the nightlife. At the time, he was about 35 years of age. He was single, and he was making the most of his time in Thailand. Now, Apple, she was a girl of about 22 years of age. She was a working girl. She wasn't particularly tied to any bar, or she wasn't a hostess in any club, anything like that. She was what's commonly known as a freelancer. So she had her various hangouts. She wasn't a street girl as such. She wouldn't go and stand on Sukhumvit Road touting for customers. You know, she had her the venues that she could hang out where freelancers could go. Now, this lady, Apple, we're calling her Apple for the sake of the video, she was about 22, 23. She was very, very good looking. She was a lot better looking than even the prettiest of Thai girls that you see around the bar. She was outstandingly beautiful. She was very successful as a working girl in Bangkok. She had a lot of customers. She had guys sending her money from time to time. I don't know how many or how much, but she was very, very successful at what she did. Now, she was kind of hardcore as far as, you know, she knew how to extract the maximum amount of money from a customer. She knew the right buttons to push. She knew what to say. She was very, very good at her job, and she was quite successful at what she did. Now, Apple had moved down from the north, like many of these girls, somewhere in Isan, Buriram, Khon Kaen, anywhere up there. And she'd had a child, a daughter, when she was very, very young. I believe she was about 15, 16. Normal story. The husband, he stuck around for a few weeks, and bit of a drunk by all, you know, from what I'd heard from other people. But anyway, he was a total loser. He took off and did his own thing. And unfortunately, Apple was stuck up north with a baby. Though being uneducated, she didn't have a lot of opportunity. So she decided to come down to Bangkok and try and earn some money. And I think originally when she came down, she wasn't a working girl to start with. She was quite young. And I believe she had a job in a low-grade hotel, you know, a Thai no-star hotel, as she was making beds and cleaning, that sort of thing. Now, that's a hard job, you know. They give them something like 20 rooms to do, to clean. Very tiring, minimum wage, and it's just not a long-term thing you'd want to do if you were in her position. So back to where we left off. So basically, as I say, she's very, very beautiful. She's 22 now. She's working her venues. She's got her regular customers, and she knows the game pretty well. Now, one of Apple's favourite hangouts was a place called Therme. I believe it's still in operation, but it's a shadow of what it used to be. It's kind of, if you come out of Soi Nana, Soi 4, and head towards Asok, walking, it's kind of on the left around Soi 11, a little bit further down there maybe. I can't remember exactly how to describe it, but it's down there. And basically what Therme is, it's been there for at least 20 years that I know of. I mean, I first started going there in 1992. And it was one of these places, it used to get packed after 2 o'clock in the morning. All the freelancers went down there. You had a lot of guys who lived in Bangkok who didn't want to pay bar fines, or they didn't particularly want to take girls. They just liked looking to see what it was about, and they'd go down there drinking. Now, as I say, Therme is still pretty much there. I haven't been there for a number of years. I think I popped in about 3 years ago, and as I say, it was a shadow of what it used to be. It used to be an all-night drinking venue, and it was packed to the rafters with all foreign men and girls, and you know, it really was packed. That's not an exaggeration. Nowadays it's not quite, well, it's a long way from what it used to be. You still get people down there, but as I understand it, it's nowhere near as busy as it used to be. So that's Therme basically. It wasn't exactly a nightclub or a bar, or I don't know how you describe it, more of just a drinking venue. When I used to go there 20 odd years ago, they had a jukebox. That was it. That was the musical entertainment. So you'd have 400 or 500 people in this place and a jukebox. And if nobody put coins in it, there wasn't any music. Simple as that. Totally Thai run, of course. Now, Apple used to like to head down to Therme. It was one of those places she could go at the end of the night. It stayed open as far as, well, I mean, I'd been in there till 6:30 in the morning. I'd left and it still wasn't closing, so I don't know what time they actually closed. But Apple liked to go to Therme for the simple reason, if she'd had customers in the earlier part of the evening, she could go down to Therme later on and get a second and a third and bulk her money out, as it was. So it was quite a good pickup joint for her. And I don't think they had an entrance fee. They might have insisted that the girls bought a drink, but then again, I suppose without the girls, the guys wouldn't have come down, so maybe not. Okay, so typical weekday night. It was fairly busy in Therme, and Apple had been out doing a normal thing. She'd been working. Don't know if she'd had customers that night, but she was in Therme with a friend, and they were just chilling out, looking for opportunities in the bar, as they do. And this is when Mark came into Therme. I think it was his second or third time he'd been in there. He'd been out at Soy Cowboy. He'd looked around. He'd been in several bars. Didn't see anything that took his fancy. Decided to carry on drinking. Don't think he had to get up early in the morning or anything. Obviously, else he wouldn't have been out. So Mark headed down to Therme with a couple of friends. They were in there drinking. I guess it must be about 3 o'clock in the morning now. And from the other end of the room, he sees this stunning girl. Can't take his eyes off her. She looks back at him, just a quick glance. She's very clever. She knows how to hook a guy. Quick glance at Mark, and she starts talking to a friend. Well, of course, Mark's already, he's captivated by it. Why wouldn't you be? She's beautiful. And so he heads down there, strikes up a conversation with Apple, and has a drink with her. Now, I don't know if he ended up going with her that evening, because I actually had to leave. I was very tired. I was worse aware for drink, but they'd actually met anyway. So let's not say they were an item, but you know, Mark had met Apple. He really liked her a lot. And as far as Apple was concerned, you know, I guess Mark was just another customer. Now, the thing about this story, I won't give away too much right at the beginning, but this is quite interesting, because when you hear foreigners talking about Thai bar girls, Thai working girls, they don't always hold them in the highest esteem. And what I mean by that is, they'll say things like, you know, they're money grabbers, they're running out for themselves, they're trying to rip off foreigners. And, you know, these girls are motivated by money, and why not? Aren't we all? But this story will show you that not every bar girl is evil, has a black heart, because how this story spins out later on, you'll see that some Thai girls actually have a very big heart, and you'll see this in this story. So back to where we were. Mark has met Apple. They're in Therme, and they basically hook up later in the week. They, you know, he knows what she does, but obviously he likes her a lot, so he's taking her out for dinner, just noodles, that sort of thing, nothing fancy. But he's meeting her on a daily basis. When she has a regular customer, she makes her excuses as to why she can't meet him. Could be anything from she's got to go up country to see her parents, or she's got a sick friend, but the normal sort of stories they come out with. But she worked her schedule around him. But she did see him on a regular basis, and he was quite happy. He really liked Apple a lot. In fact, I think he did fall in love with her. Now, as I said at the beginning of the story, Mark had quite a good job in IT. He was paid very, very well. And after a time, he'd been with Apple for several weeks at this time, and they were pretty much an item. He didn't want her to work for obvious reasons. He was, at this time now, he was now giving her money, but she didn't want to move in with him. I guess that's so she could, still have her freedom as such. And but they were pretty much an item. Now, about this time, Mark actually got a promotion within his company, and he'd never been to Indonesia. Now, this is where they were going to send him, and it was going to happen very, very quickly. Now, he hadn't been in Thailand, in Bangkok, that long, only several months. As I say, he got promoted, and they were planning to send him to Jakarta. He was happy initially because it was a promotion. With a promotion, more money comes along, and more power, a better position. And he took the job, and he did go to Jakarta. Now, several weeks went by, and Mark was getting on well with his job in Jakarta. I can't go into too much details. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but he was living there. But he couldn't really stop thinking about Apple. I mean, I guess he'd had serious girlfriends in the past, but he really, really fell in love with Apple in a big way, and he just couldn't get her out of his mind. I mean, I guess he thought when he'd leave Thailand and go to Indonesia, he'd hook up with somebody new. Indonesia is not the same as Thailand. I've actually worked there myself. It's a totally Muslim dominated country. So although there's alcohol and things, it is low key, and it's not in your face, and I don't think it's nowhere near as much fun as Thailand, which Mark would have found out the same. But he couldn't stop thinking about Apple, and in the end, he had a bit of money saved up, and he just had to get back to Thailand. Now, obviously, his company wouldn't let him go. They're not going to give him another position in Thailand when he's in a fairly high position in Indonesia, in Jakarta. But he had to get back. He just couldn't stop thinking about Apple, and he wondered what she was up to, or who she was up to it with. But he took the decision. He had some savings. I don't know exactly how much, but it was quite substantial. We're not talking millions, but a few 100,000 baht. He took the decision with a friend of his who was still in Thailand that he was going to terminate his job. He was going to finish his job, and he had this idea that he was going to go back to Bangkok, and he was going to open a business. He wasn't sure what kind of business he was going to open, if it was going to be computer related, if he was going to open a bar like a lot of foreigners do. He wasn't sure, but all he knew is the only thing that mattered to him was getting back to Thailand and getting back to Apple, and he didn't care what it took to do that. Quite foolish, really, giving up a career in the company he was with. He was doing well, but he was just struck, and he had to get back to Thailand. So Mark did finish with his company in Indonesia, and packed his things, got all his money together, all his liquid cash, and he headed back to Bangkok, got himself a small apartment, nothing special. He was quite frugal to start with, because he figured, if he hasn't got an income coming in, he has got savings, but he didn't want to spend so much every week, because if you haven't got an income coming in, then obviously your money will run out fast, and he needed as much as he could have to basically start a business, which at this time he still didn't know what he was going to do. So he took a room. It was Sukhumvit Soi 36 or 37. Basically, it was nothing fancy. It was just a room. It did have air conditioning. It had a little kitchen area. I wouldn't describe it as an apartment. It was more like a room with a shower and a toilet, but it was comfortable. And in those days, I think he was paying 3,500, 4,000 baht a month. It was adequate. Adequate. It wasn't. It was a long way from being very, very comfortable. So Mark's got his apartment. He's looking around for things to do. He can't quite nail nail it down. And then with his friend, they have this idea that they want to open a bit of a bar slash nightclub. They don't really have enough money to do a big nightclub, but something where maybe it's a bar up until 11 o'clock, and after 11 a band kicks in, and in those days the venues could stay open all night long, not like nowadays. It's 2 a.m. they're closing. They're trying to extend that to 4 o'clock, but as we live and breathe, it's 2 a.m. Lights on and you're booted out, basically. So there's where we are at the moment. So Mark's now back in Bangkok, and he's looking to open a venue with his friend. He's living off his savings, and it is quite difficult to find a venue in Bangkok. If you want to be central, especially around Sukhumvit, it's probably, if not one of the most expensive real estate areas in Bangkok. You're going to pay through the nose, even for a small place. So obviously, with a restricted budget, he had to be very, very careful, and it took a long time searching. And unfortunately, he never actually found the venue that would have been good enough to open the business he wanted to do. In the meantime, he was living frugal. He was going out drinking. He had hooked up with Apple again. He was very happy about that. Happy as Apple would stay over at his room. A lot of the time she'd be out and she'd turn up at 3, 4 in the morning, which Mark hated, because obviously if she knocks on the door at 4 o'clock in the morning, he knows what she's been up to. But being in love with Apple, he wasn't going to turn her away, because, better to have a small piece of cake than no cake at all, as it were. So that's how it went for Mark. He was with Apple. Sometimes he'd have a all to himself for a day and a night or a couple of nights. Other times she'd make her excuses. She had to go and see one of her regular customers, but of course she never said that to Mark. There was always an excuse. As I say, sometimes she'd turn up at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, bang his door. He was extremely jealous, very, very jealous. He couldn't do anything about it. He knew he couldn't do anything about it. The thing with the Thai girls, if you try to be too controlling, they'll just walk away. And, he knew this. He wasn't a stupid man. But he was absolutely full on in love with her, and he was happy to take what he could get, basically. So that's it. They were in this kind of relationship, which was a bit of a strange one. I think Apple was fairly happy as well, because although she did take some money from Mark, she didn't charge him on an hourly or daily rate, because he was a fairly decent looking guy. He was quite a nice character, and to be fair, I think she enjoyed his company. We all need a bit of stability in our lives, and I think Mark was stability for Apple. It was a base for her, basically. So we're going to jump forward a few months now, and Mark's money is starting to dwindle quite quickly. As I say, he hasn't got an income. He's still looking for a venue, but of course, eventually what happens is he gets to the point where even if he finds a venue that will suit, that he could have got 3 months ago, he now doesn't have enough money, and he has to start thinking about smaller plans. But unfortunately, nothing does come off, and the money's dwindling away. Obviously, he has to give Apple something. He has to eat. He has to pay his rent. He has his air conditioning bill, and his general living expenses. And Thailand is expensive. You can live cheap, but I think Mark was one of those guys. He got a bit depressed if he sat in his room, so he tended to go out most nights, and even if it was just beer bars, he was spending. So we'll jump forward quite a few weeks now, several months maybe, and Mark's money is getting desperately low, desperately low. He keeps setting himself little goals. When he gets to a certain point, maybe he'll have to go back and work and come back out, but he just can't bear to be separated from Apple. So he kind of, his solution, short-term solution, which isn't going to work long time, but what he starts doing, he starts cutting down his costs even more. He stops going out to beer bars. He starts drinking. He buys Chang beer from 7-Eleven. He sits on the steps and drinks it. He'll hang around outside down Sukhumvit, but he's not actually spending any money in venues. He might buy a beer from 7-Eleven, as I say. And eventually the day does come where he completely runs out of money. He put a little bit by for emergencies, to buy an airfare back to America. And he'd always had this small pot of money that if it all went wrong, then at least he could buy a cheap airfare, stops off somewhere, and but it would get him home. But you know, like a lot of these guys who have dreams, they think that it's going to work itself out, and it doesn't always work itself out. Unfortunately, Mark, he did dip into his little fund, and he dipped into it more and more, and eventually he had nothing left, and he was basically broke, absolutely broke. Now, at this point in time, the only option he had two options. One was to go to his embassy and explain his position and hope somehow they could put him on an aircraft and get him home. Or I don't think borrowing money from anybody in the US was an option, because I think he'd already done that when he was running low on money. He'd basically tapped everybody up for a loan. So I think his goodwill was pretty much exhausted. He couldn't borrow any more money. The only other option he had was to sit down with Apple and explain the whole story, which he did. So he asked Apple not to work one night, and he sat her down and he basically told Apple the whole story. You know, he said he'd fallen in love with her at the beginning. He'd had a nice relationship with her. While he'd had money, he, you know, looked after as best he could. But unfortunately now he was absolutely stone broke, didn't have any money. He had a couple of weeks left on his apartment, and he didn't know what he was going to do. Now, he was fully expecting Apple to make her excuses, tell Mark, I'll see you later, and that would be it. He'd never see her again. And this is the part of the story where I did say earlier about Thai girls having a heart. As I said earlier, a lot of the videos, people will say Thai girls, bar girls, are heartless. You know, they'd leave you with nothing. They'll take the gold out of your teeth. But they're not all like this, and this story proves it. And I know this to be a true story. So this is to show you another side of the coin, as it were, with the Thai girls. Now, at this point, Apple, she completely changed her way of thinking. Originally, she'd seen Mark as a nice guy, but he was a cash cow. He was a foreigner. He had cash, and as long as he was hooked up with Apple, then she was pretty certain to receive cash most weeks, most months, and it was worth staying with him. And as I say, on top of that, she actually genuinely did like his company. I wouldn't say she was in love with him, but that's how it went. Now, as I say, Mark now totally broke. He expected Apple to make her excuses and clear off, never to be seen again, and perhaps his next step would have been the embassy. Now, that never happened. What happened is, very surprisingly, Apple turned round to Mark and said, "Mai Pin Lai." It doesn't matter. Forgive my pronunciation, but basically, she basically told Mark it doesn't matter, and she was going to try her best to look after him. Yep, you heard me right. She was going to look after him. So they had a bit of a discussion about this. Apple agreed that she'd pay the rent. She'd continue paying the rent because she made good money, and 3,500 baht a month to her wasn't a lot of money. And, you know, the little bit of shopping that they'd have and all that wasn't a huge amount of money. So Apple, good to her word, she carried on working, but she looked after Mark. Now, she paid the rent. Obviously, the only way she could finance this relationship was, as she always did, she'd go out, she'd have regular customers. Sometimes she'd be out all night, sometimes she'd be gone for a few hours. But it was killing Mark. Mark loved her, really loved her. And you can imagine, he was sitting in this room, he didn't have any money. Apple was good enough to, you know, look after him, pay the rent and buy some shopping and, you know, get a few beers in from 7-Eleven. She was very kind to him, but you got to put yourself in his position. What kind of man's going to feel like a man in that position? Not only that, you're thinking, forget she's a working girl. This is a girl you're in love with, deeply in love with. And when she says good night to you, I'll see you later, you know what she's doing, you know where she's going, you just don't know who with. And it was driving Mark crazy. He couldn't stand it. He was so jealous. You know, it basically tore him apart. But unfortunately, there wasn't a lot he could do about it. Now, in the meantime, things took a turn again, because while this situation was going on, so basically Apple was going out and working. Mark was in the room in the evenings. He was bitterly jealous, thinking about her. She'd come home at 4 or 5 in the morning. He'd try not to question her too much. He didn't want to get on her nerves, but that's how it worked out. Apple was going out working. Mark was at home upset, sad, thinking about it, couldn't get it out of his mind. But it went on like that for, several weeks, maybe months. But in the meantime, Mark wasn't a loser. He wasn't one of these guys who sat down and felt sorry for himself and thought the world owed him a living. Not at all. In the meantime, he'd been looking at other businesses, jobs, things he could do. And he'd actually been quite active in the day. He'd been out all day, treading the streets of Bangkok. And he actually found he did get up on his feet again. He actually got a job. So he didn't need money to start it with a local company. There were some foreigners involved. I think it was an Australian company who had partnered up with some Thais, and I don't know exactly what they did. It was something to do with computers again, but obviously Mark was knowledgeable with IT, so it made sense. They didn't have to pay for somebody's airfare to come out from the West. They didn't have to pay holiday money and sick pay and all this sort of thing. And Mark was already there. He had the skills, so they said, "Hey, why not? Come and join us," which he did. Now, he did very well with this company. He was on a very, very small salary, but he was able to go back to Apple and say, "Look, I'm now earning," and I believe he wanted her to stop what she was doing, but it wasn't quite the right time because he wasn't earning a lot, although he was able to start paying the rent and, buy shopping and take care of himself, all that sort of thing. I don't know what he'd done for his visas. His visa back then, I mean, it was a lot easier than it is now. You could nip across to Cambodia. It was a bus ride. You went out, you had a stamp, you come back in, probably something like that, I would imagine. But anyway, Mark's now with his company. He's doing quite well. And now the good thing about this company he was working with, he actually had an opportunity to make more money than his salary. I don't know if it was a kind of commission or he made money on sales or whatever it was, but what happened was he actually ended up making a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money, and he made so much money, in fact he got to the position where he could move out of the I've actually missed out a vital part of the story. I don't know how I've managed to do that. So before Mark had got this job, it had come to a head with Apple and him. He was extremely jealous, as I said, and Apple couldn't stand it anymore. And I think this is when he just started to work, but he didn't say anything to Apple. They had a fight. Apple moved out and basically thought, well, I'm not having this every day. I've been looking after you, and you're having a go at me. And she left. Now by this time, I think it had run its course. Mark was pretty much over Apple. He'd spent a lot of months with her. It had run its course, and I think there was no love lost. So when he went to work for this company, he concentrated on that. He made a lot of money, and that was basically it. That was a story. There's just one more epilogue, as it were, to the story. Now, about a year later, Mark was out in Soi 4 near Nana Plaza. He wasn't in Nana Plaza. He was near Nana Plaza on Soi 4, and I think he was grabbing one of those burgers just outside, those nice ones. But anyway, he was there. And at this time, he'd managed to put quite a lot of money by, and he was making some serious money now. He was on a lot more than just a regular salary. He hadn't seen Apple for probably 8 months. And he often thought about her because obviously she played a big part in his life. And in fact, if it hadn't been for Apple, there's no way he would have survived in Bangkok when he was down in his luck. Now, this particular night, he was ordering his burger, and who did he see across the road? It was Apple. And of course he got excited because he hadn't seen her for a long time. She was working. She was looking a little bit worse for wear, a little bit older. She was hanging around outside the Nana Hotel. I mean, if you're quite familiar with Soi 4, you'll know that the Nana Hotel has a lot of freelancers hanging about outside. And on this particular night, Apple was one of them. Anyway, Steve got together with her, and he took her for a beer, took her in one of the bars. I think it was somewhere like Stumble, something like that. And he just wanted to catch up, find out what was going on. He wanted to tell her how good he was doing. And unfortunately, Apple wasn't doing that well. She'd got sick, nothing real serious, but she'd been off work, or she hadn't been working for herself. And she was pretty broke at this time, and she wasn't desperate. She'd told Mark the story. She was behind with her rent, and she'd had to send money up country, which she couldn't send. And, it was a slow time of the year. So to conclude this story, at this point, Mark bought her a drink. He told her to stay put. He went round the corner to Sukhumvit. He went to a cash point, and I think back then you could take out 20,000 baht. He went back to the bar, didn't say anything to Apple at the time. He ordered another drink for himself. He ordered another drink for Apple. They sat there talking, and basically Mark said to Apple, it was quite emotional at the time. He explained everything he'd gone through and his emotions with his feelings with Apple, and how she'd got him through his dark hour, as it were. And basically Mark thanked her. He actually thanked her for taking care of him, keeping his hopes up. And with that, he put his hands in his pocket, took out the 20,000 baht that he'd just taken out of the ATM, and he gave it to Apple. Said, "That's for you. It's a gift. You know, I'm not going to forget what you've done for me." And as far as I know, they went on their separate ways, and they never ever met again. So guys, that's the end of this story. There is a moral to the story, I guess, and that's don't judge a book by its cover. Obviously, Apple was a working girl, probably still is. You know, taking money from Mark. But when it hit the fan and Mark was down on his luck, look what happened. Apple basically took care of him. If it wasn't for Apple, he wouldn't have survived. He'd have been begging his embassy for a ticket. He'd have gone back to the States. Who knows what had happened. But as it was, he picked himself up. Okay, he put the effort in. But without Apple, it wouldn't have happened. And as a nice gesture, Mark gave Apple the 20,000 baht as a gift. She was very, very happy. So I think the moral of the story is, as I say, guys, don't judge a book by a cover. And there is two sides to every story. So that's the end of this one. I hope you've enjoyed that story. This is Pete signing out, and I'll catch up with you next time.